Hello everybody, and welcome back to Insider's Guide. Today, we're discussing the most expensive ski area in the whole world, Courchevel. If you haven't already, watch part A before this, as it'll give a lot of context to the things I'm about to say. It's the top link in the description. So with that, let's begin in Insider's Guide to Ski Resorts, edition Courchevel. We'll start over here in Courchevel 1650, or Courchevel Morillonde as some call it. Morillonde really has 7 main lifts: the Arionda gondola, the Chapelet, Signal, and Roquemeunier 6-pack chairlifts, the Pyramides Pomas, and the Roc Merlet fixed grip triple, one of only a handful of fixed grips in the 3 valleys. Of these 7, only Signal tends to get lines. Arionda can also get backed up at the beginning of the day, but as previously discussed, surface lifts, in this case the Belvedere and Grange Pomas, can get you around the lines for the main lifts. The terrain on Morillonde is not overly varied. For the most part, it's intermediate groomers. Roc Merlet is a super short red, which is why its chairlift is fixed grip. Pyramide, Lac Arionda, Montagne Russe, and Plan Minier are super nice because they're not as busy as other pistes due to the fact they're solely serviced by the Pyramide surface lifts. The lifts are pretty long for surface lifts, so it is quite annoying. The red piste Roc Meunier is a nice short little red run. It's pretty steep, but it's not super busy and is served by a lift that almost never has lines. As such, I love to lap Roc Meunier. Off the top of Chapelet and Signal, you have a lot of options. First and foremost is the blue piste Easy Way. Easy Way is a little road that goes around behind the mountaintop as an alternative to Gentian. However, as Gentian is blue and not very steep, I've found that Easy Way is more useless than helpful. This piste, Arionda, runs along Signal from top to bottom. The top of Arionda is quite nice. However, the lower part, below the top of the Arionda gondola, here, is extremely narrow and busy. I try to avoid this section of the piste. The blue piste Signal is a great alternative as it is much wider and less busy. Just ski down the green Petite Bosse a little bit, and then take your first right. Gentian itself is also relatively narrow, but it's much less busy than Arionda. The red Grande Bosse is my favorite piste in the Signal pod. Grande Bosse is wide and tends to have the best snow quality of all these runs under Signal. The green run Petite Bosse serves primarily to access this blue Gravé. Petite Bosse is a road through the trees that requires pushing in several spots. Gravé is extremely narrow and I find it hard to control my speed. I much prefer Roc Meunier. Next, we go to the Chapelet pod. The Chapelet piste itself is an extremely nice red run, first through the rocks and then through the forest. Tetra is a little cutoff that goes around the other side of a large rock formation. Upper Rocher is a narrow little piste that winds through and around a massive boulder field. I find it super fun. Lower Rocher here is not as fun as it is much busier than the upper section and doesn't typically have good snow. Bel Air is much nicer than Lower Rocher, as it is wider and has more consistent snow. Praline, here, is the only green to get back to the village. However, I try to avoid this piste as it is only a road and requires pushing along almost the entire extent from Chapelet to Grange. This blue piste Grange is a nice little lap served by its own lift. It's not typically busy, so I would highly recommend it. Marquis is the main run into Courchevel Morillonde. It is incredibly wide and as such seems to be empty. Accessing Marquis does require a bit of a push past the bottom of Signal, so keep up a bit of speed at the bottom of these runs. Indian and Kepe are alternative blues, but Marquis is certainly my favorite. Coming up the opposite face of Roc Merlet is the Champ Rose high-speed quad. It's not typically busy, but it can be in the late morning and late afternoon as people use it to access Morillonde. Aside from the Roc Merlet piste, Champ Rose serves 2 runs that tend to have terrible snow coverage. However, if you come on a powder day, Champ Rose is absolutely worth a try. Opposite of Roc Meunier is the Aiguille du Fris 6-pack. The runs under the lift, namely Cave des Creux, Altipol, and Bure, are not my favorite runs to lap. They're also not the crowd's favorite runs to lap. As such, Aiguille du Fris primarily serves as an egress lift to get to Courchevel 1850 from Courchevel 1650. It can get lines at mid-morning, but they tend to dissipate. The blue piste Prémerouer is just a road through the trees, not something that I would do again if I didn't have to. Serving all of these chairlifts in the valley is the Blue Run Creux. It is an extremely wide piste as it carries a vast majority of all the skiers coming into Courchevel via the Versant-sur-Lire. Lac Creux is just a road, but can be quite useful to avoid having to ride Aiguille du Fris to get to Courchevel 1850, which is the main base area. Rama is a very short blue that runs from the top of Aiguille du Fris to the bottom of Marmotte, in this direction. Altiport is the main blue that connects Aiguille du Fris to Courchevel 1850. It goes uphill a bit right here where it meets the blue piste Biolay, so keep up some of that speed if you're not going to the Pralong lift. Jumping back up towards Aiguille du Fris, you can see the Marmotte six-pack here. It is almost never busy and serves a pair of nice traditional red cruisers. The Black Run Suisse is one of the most popular blacks in the Three Valleys, so I prefer to lap the Marmotte's red over the Swiss black. The Swiss lift is a high-speed quad that does not typically have lines except on the busiest days. I like to use both Marmottes and Swiss as alternatives in the few instances where the Vizelle gondola, here, is busy. The Solire cable car adds extra capacity, taking pressure off of Vizelle, but it's closed for renovations for the 22-23 season. Off the top of Vizelle, Marmotte, and Swiss, you can ski all of this terrain into Courchevel that we're talking about, or you can ski into Méribel or Mauterets. To access Creux or the Méribel pistes from this trio, you must go around here on a short little road which can be quite busy. There are incredible views to be found all around in this area. This piste, called M, actually has a quite interesting name origin story. Originally, all of Courchevel's pistes were lettered, but as the resort expanded, they had to switch them all to names. However, the piste M is as steep as a wall, which is mur in French, so they declined to give M a different name. M is super steep and often ungroomed. The same can be said for Combe des Pilons. The Combe de la Solire is one of Courchevel's most iconic runs. This steep, wide red is super scenic and super rewarding, although it can be a touch icy from time to time. If you can get up early and get first tracks on Combe Solire, try to do it. There's no feeling quite like flying down fresh corduroy staring at Mont Blanc in the silence of the morning. Téléphone is a groomed black off of Combe Solire. The Grand Couloir is exactly what it sounds like. Below all of the advanced stuff off of Solire is an easier area served by the Biolay and Pralong six-packs, the Verdon gondola, and a handful of surface lifts. Pralong, Biolay, and Verdon can all get pretty busy because this is the central area of Courchevel. Pralong and Biolay are insanely popular blues that have terrible snow quality by the end of the day. In fact, oftentimes, if the sun is out softening up the snow, these runs will have developed moguls by midday. Marquetie can be this way as well, as although it is slightly less busy than the blues, it is steeper. This part of Biolay-Verdon is red because it is left ungroomed. The blue part is a road, as is Pralong Suisse. Super Pralong is a bit wider, but is also primarily an access run for the Suisse lift and the Altiport piste. Petit Lac is also a road, and I found that it is quite useless. It's pretty difficult to get to this lower part of Biolay from Altiport. Stay way to your left on Altiport piste, and keep up a ton of speed. The pistes Altiport and Pralong offer great views of the Altiport, and if you get lucky, you might just be able to watch a plane land at what some consider the world's most difficult airport. Renard, while green, is much narrower than the parallel Verdon piste, so I much prefer to take Verdon. This family park in between the two seems to be a terrain park with primary features of small to medium jumps. The Verdon piste runs all the way down to the area called La Croisette, which is where the Jardin Alpin, Verdon, and Chenu gondolas all originate. Belle Côte and Jardin Alpin also run down to La Croisette. Jardin Alpin tends to be the less busy run, but be careful because if it is early or late season, lower Jardin Alpin can be closed, forcing you to take Étoile back up to the Verdon piste. The Jardin Alpin gondola itself is quite old, bumpy, noisy, and overall uncomfortable, so I much prefer the Verdon gondola for lapping. The Belle Côte Poma lift is quite interesting as it has a handful of turns, but it's quite long for a surface lift. It's still a good alternative if Verdon and Jardin Alpin are busy, however. There's also a nice learning area here next to Pralong if you want to avoid the crowds on Belle Côte and Verdon. Source, here, and Cospilot, here, are both narrow blue pistes served by extremely long surface lifts, a combination that most people tend to dislike. To the right of La Croisette is a nice area collectively known as Chenu. It is served by 3 lifts, the Cox high-speed quad, the Chenu gondola, and the Plontré six-pack. Chenu and Plontrey both tend not to be too busy, but Cox is your most sure bet to be empty. Even if you go to Cox and it is busy, you can then ski on down to Chenu and Plontrey. Chenu is a very old gondola, as it has cramped 4-passenger cabins that rattle and shake. It still has a little bit of charm to it, though, at least for me. The Chenu area has a bunch of nice reds whose upper portions are out in the open and lower portions are through the trees, similar to pistes in North America. There are enough pistes, and each piste is wide enough to spread out the crowds nicely and give you a bit more space than you can find in the Biolay or Solier areas. The blue piste Anemone winds through and around these reds. It can be difficult to follow, so if you don't ski reds, be careful you don't accidentally end up on one. Lac Bleu is a nice, super wide blue piste that isn't too terribly difficult. It's a shame it doesn't run all the way to the bottom. Los Est is a road, but it's actually quite nice as it meanders through the forest on its lower half. Below La Croisette is the Tauvet area. Tauvet is a super wide blue, which is perfect for lower level skiers making wide turns. It's not too terribly long, and you have your choice of either a gondola or six-pack. Off to the left is a fixed grip quad that primarily serves ski and ski out access to the resort hotel down in the valley. As such, Grande Combe is not a great run to lap. To the right of Tauvet, in the area of the village called Le Prat, are a number of reds crisscrossing throughout the forest. These are all mainly roads. In particular, the main run from Courchevel 1850 to Le Prat is Brigues, which is a more traditional red in this stretch, but is a road from here down into the town. The one black, Jean Blanc, is a steep groomer through the forest, but it flows into the run out of Brigues. I don't love lapping these runs, but the one nice thing is that the Prat Gondola and Forêt Bubble 6-pack, both of which are super nice lifts, nearly never have crowds. The right side of Le Prat, served by the Forêt chairlift, has two runs, the Murettes Red and the L'Eclipse Black. Eclipse is one of my favorite blacks in the whole of the three valleys. It's extremely steep and extremely long, which is quite challenging. However, if you're up for it, I would absolutely recommend trying it. Murette is yet another of the empty pistes cut through the forest. To the right of Le Prat is Latania. While Le Prat is a village in the Courchevel resort, Latania is technically its own ski area, one of the 7 in the three valleys. The base area of Latania is served by a beat-up old gondola and extremely long surface lift. Latania is absolutely beautiful, a picturesque mountain town with wooden chalets tucked in the forest. Moretta Blanche, or just Moretta, is a nice red run straight down the face of the mountain, while Planfontaine winds throughout the forest. Both tend to have poor snow conditions. By far my favorite piste in Latania is Folière. It's a long, mellow run through the trees, and while not particularly challenging, it is quite tranquil. Upper Latania has the Bouc Blanc 6-pack and the Deux des Langes high-speed quad. Bouc Blanc serves these two reds, along with the top of L'Eclipse. A roll, this blue, is really just to allow lower-level skiers to access lower Latania. It's just a road on the cusp of treeline, but it's difficult to pass anybody on said piste. It's much more annoying than other roads, namely Los Est. Deux des Langes is an often neglected black groomer. It's one of my favorite runs to lap. The Deux des Langes lift can get busy from time to time because you can get to Maribel from the top of it, but those busy periods are typically only short bursts of a few minutes, occurring only a couple times in the afternoon. The blue piste Col de la Loze really isn't that difficult. I'm not sure why it's blue. Either way, it's definitely not a run to be repeated if possible. It's quite flat at the end, and unless you take Langes, you still have to push uphill to access the pistes of Chenu. Well, that's about it for Courchevel. As always, please leave any questions down below. If you haven't already, go watch parts C, D, and E about the 3 other main areas in Les Trois Vallées. Thank you all so much for watching. All my love, I'm out.